Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Cornerstone Giving Society Luncheon here at the beautiful Ritz Carlton Tiburon Golf Resort. I'm Bob Erzik. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications at St. Matthew's House, and we'd like to thank you for your continued support of our mission. Without you, we couldn't serve the people in our community who are going through homelessness, through hunger, through addiction and poverty. So you deserve a huge round of applause for that. So please give yourself a round of applause. Well deserved. Thank you. We have a real treat for you today. After lunch, we have 7-time New York Times best-selling author Bruce Feiler here. He's going to talk about his latest inspirational book, Life is in the Transitions, Mastering Change at Any Age. Bruce will also be taking your questions from the audience and about the book as well. And then he's going to stick around for a little bit and sign your copy that you may have, as well as take a picture with you if you'd like. But first, I'd like to introduce Rick Fumo, the board chairman at St. Matthew's House, with today's invocation.
Board chairman and minister for a day. Okay, let's bow our heads, please. Lord God, we are thankful for a great many blessings today. We thank you for the generosity and support of all the people in this room. We thank you for the dedicated leadership, employees, and volunteers who do the work of St. Matthew's House every day. We're thankful to you for allowing us to be so directly involved in your work, serving our brothers and sisters experiencing homelessness, hunger, and addiction. We ask your blessing on all of us gathered here today and for all the men and women in our care across our ministry. And Lord, we pray for peace in Ukraine and protection over all those people in harm's way, which is on everyone's mind. Lastly, please bless this meal we are sharing today and bless all the people that have made this afternoon possible, those who planned the event, those that prepared the meal, and those serving us today. We ask this in the name of our Lord Jesus. Amen.
St. Matthew's House began in 1987 when a group of Naples parishioners followed a calling to bring food to a homeless population living in a nearby wooded area. They began gathering contributions of both food and clothing while establishing the mission's food pantry. Throughout the years, community support has helped grow that small mission into today's multifaceted organization focused on spiritual change.
That's really where we started 34 years ago. Just a group came together and decided to feed the homeless in the woods. So we started a soup kitchen, feeding kitchen, and it's grown from there. You know, during the pandemic, we've fed over 270,000 households with groceries.
St. Matthew's House offers faith-based enterprise solutions to poverty and addiction. Our unique social enterprise model not only provides a significant source of sustainable revenue for the organization at over 50% of the annual budget, but it also provides those we serve with job training and work experience so they're able to provide for themselves and their families.
Yeah, it is really a unique model with our 6 thrift stores and our Lulu's Kitchen now, Fresh Start Cafe, our Port LaBelle Inn and Conference Center, a car wash and detail center, and a catering company. All social enterprises that provide job training, job placement for the people in our programs, but all the revenue earned in these businesses goes back into the mission. So every dollar donated does go directly to support the programs.
And one of those is the Justin's Place Addiction Recovery Program. Established in 2010 as a 16-bed facility exclusively for men, it's now grown to a 160-bed, 4-location program designed for both men and women. Justin's Place continues to be the only year-long faith-based recovery program in Collier County, designed to equip those battling addiction with the tools and resources needed to live a productive, self-sufficient life.
A lot of the organizations around the country just look at sobriety as a way to determine if someone's success. And we've wrestled with that over the years and landed on a way that we can measure a whole person approach, and that involves family and faith, relationships, work, education, health, mental health, and then of course also sobriety. And so when you look at success, it's more than just a number. It's actually a trajectory of that individual based on those 8 criteria. And we see that our folks are among some of the successful recovery program participants once they leave Justin's Place.
Over 650 men and women have graduated from the Justin's Place Addiction Program, with nearly every one of them earning a full-time job afterward. One of those grads is Brittany Hargrove, whose success story Wink News recently profiled.
A Southwest Florida woman has an incredible journey of triumph, and she says St. Matthew's House helped to save her life. Now she's paying it forward, helping others in the same position she once found herself. Wink News reporter Taylor Wirtz is live in our newsroom, and Taylor, her supervisor called her an inspiration.
Lois, she's gone from someone who did not want to be at St. Matthew's to someone who has a full, fulfilling life helping others. Behind bars, addicted to heroin, and often homeless, Brittany Hargrove found herself needing a break in life.
I was really just tired of begging for a couple dollars at a time, trying to find somebody who would let me sleep on a couch. I was just looking for something different.
Enter St. Matthew's House. Upon her release from jail, Hargrove entered a year-long addiction recovery program with the organization, skeptical of where it would lead.
It looked like she was here to figure out how she could get out of here.
Nobody wants to open themselves up to accountability from strangers. Like, yes, please walk me through my past trauma and all of my mistakes.
Fast forward 8 years. Hargrove is sober, married, a stepmother, about to get her master's degree, and now the director of the same shelter she entered as a broken woman.
I think that sort of catches people off guard when I tell them, but to be able to connect with them on a level that builds trust through shared experience, I think opens the door to hopefully make an impact in their life. So
Brittany is inspirational. It's been a joy to really watch her, to kind of let her take on some responsibility and just really fine-tune the gifts that God already had placed in her.
It's almost immeasurable, the benefit I've received just simply by showing up each day and giving my to people who God brings in through the doors.
Our Campbell Lodge and Immokalee Friendship House are the only two emergency homeless shelters in Collier County, housing as many as 148 men, women, and children on a nightly basis.
So when someone comes into our shelter program, there's structure, there's a daily schedule of what's expected of the resident. And so what that has allowed us to do is really have a community of diversity. So you've got single males, single females, mothers with children in both of the facilities, the Immokalee Friendship House as well as the Campbell Lodge.
For 34 years, feeding the hungry has been central to the mission of St. Matthew's House. Each year, our soup kitchens and residential programs serve more than 500,000 hot meals to meet the need of those in the community. Before the pandemic, we fed between 50 and 75 households a week. But today, with the help of our church and community partners, we're feeding between 18 and 20,000 households a month at our drive-through distributions, and the need isn't subsiding.
I think St. Matthew's was always there to help. And when it came down to increasing our numbers and being present at the locations in the right areas, we're doing that, and we'll continue to do that as long as it's needed. I see smiles, thank you, tears. I mean, there's some people that because of COVID, still in the fear of COVID, you know, it's a wave, and you know behind their mask that they're smiling. And most of all, it's joy. You know, you see joy, you see in their eyes that when they look back and see what they've received from us.
And we couldn't do it without our community partners, donors, or our hundreds of volunteers who dedicate thousands of hours each year to our mission.
So there are a variety of different reasons or motivations for folks to serve, but most often it's that they want to give back. They know that our cause is really amazing and what we do impacts so many people, and they just want to be part of that. They truly are a huge part of this mission, and we couldn't do things without them. So we love our volunteers.
We certainly do. And with our volunteers, St. Matthew's House will continue our mission of serving those experiencing hunger, homelessness, and addiction in our community for many years to come.
I think we just have the opportunity to serve so many more people in so many ways. We focus on hunger, homelessness, and recovery. And that will remain our focus, but there's just a lot to do. There's a lot of people that need served. That's my goal, to continue to serve and continue to reach more people, and just continue to encourage everybody that supports St. Matthew's House.
And because of your continued support, yes, give yourselves a hand. Because of your continued support, we are able to carry out our mission every day in the community. So thank you again. So now it's time for our main event. Bruce Feiler is the author of 7 New York Times bestsellers, the presenter of 2 primetime series on PBS, and the inspiration for the drama series Council of Dads on NBC. Bruce's 2 TED Talks have been viewed more than 2 million times. That's just amazing. His latest inspirational book, Life is in the Transitions, Mastering Change at Any Age, was a top 10 New York Times bestseller. So, without further ado, here is our guest of honor, author Bruce Feiler and Bill Curry, the Vice President of Development at St. Matthew's House. Gentlemen, take it away.
Well, thank you everybody for being here today. Give it up one more time for Bruce joining us.
I'm there.
So I am Bill Curry. This is the first chance I've had to meet many of you. I'm the Vice President of Development and arrived from Chicago to join St. Matthew's House back in the middle of November and had been making an annual trek to Naples for about the last 20 years. This time I came to stay. I was really excited about that and to bring to you the long-awaited interview. It's been almost 2 years, I think, since this group has been together. And Bruce, we got together last night on the way home from the airport and really enjoyed. I had plans to let Bruce just kind of like relax from the airport to the hotel. Within about 45 seconds, we were in deep, solving all the world's problems. So in the next 30 minutes, we'll be able to cover about 3 or 4 of those. But I want to start just like we're seeing you here. Let's just dive in. We're seeing you here as a 7-time New York Times best-selling author. But that's not where you started. You've had a long journey. Tell us a little bit about how'd you get started on this journey? What started it?
I'll be happy to answer that question. First of all, I just want to say how wonderful it is to be here. The downside of delaying this for 2 years was not knowing if we could pull this off. But the upside is I got to spend 2 years learning more and getting much deeper involved and connected to the amazing work that you're doing. So I just want to begin by applauding all of you, thanking you for being here and supporting this important work that's become only more important, as we all know, in the last 2 years. So I grew up, up the road a little bit. If you want to cross the peninsula and go up, I grew up in Savannah, Georgia. 5 generations of Jews in the American South, and I think that's connected to my life and to my work because I love the South and the familyness and the togetherness and the stickiness and the storytellingness. But I grew up Jewish in the South, which means it was sort of 1 foot in and 1 foot out. I grew up Jewish, and I love the familyness and the togetherness and the stickiness and the storytellingness of being Jewish. But I grew up Jewish in the South, which is not only different from the long history of Judaism, but even of American Judaism. So I always kind of felt a part of things, but apart from them. And I left there, and I went to Yale in the 1980s, found that I learned about myself as a Southerner, went to Japan, and I'm old enough that I started writing letters home on crinkly airmail paper. Like, the kids don't know what that is. Remember, there were no lines. Like, there was a line on the back of the pad, and you had to stick it under. And so I wrote these letters home like, you're not going to believe what happened to me. And when I got back to Georgia 6 months later, everyone said, I loved your letters. And I was like, great, have we met? And it turned out that my grandmother had Xeroxed them and passed them around, and they went viral in the original sense of the word. And I thought, well, if this is that interesting to me and to all of these people, I should write a book about it. I didn't know anyone who'd ever written a book. In fact, I went to the Chatham, Effingham County Public Library in Savannah, Georgia, and I checked out the only book they had on writing, which was about propaganda in World War II. And it doesn't happen this way, but I sold my first book at 24, and I've never held a job since.
That sums it all up.
There we go.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm actually now writing a book about work and how none of us have jobs because, our work lives are not linear as our personal lives are too.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I've had some time since I got here in November to read through one of your latest books, Life in the Transitions. And tell us a little bit about the architecture. All of us have been through tons of transition through the pandemic, through relocation. My family's moving here, still in the process of moving from Chicago. It was fascinating start to finish in the book over the last couple months as I've been taking it in short bits in order to digest it. Talk to us a little bit about the architecture and what you learned.
Yeah, let me just talk about how this whole came about. So I just said I saw my first book at 24. In my 20s, I wrote books about Japan, about England. I spent a year as a circus clown with the Clyde Beatty Cole Brothers Circus up in DeLand. In my 30s, as many of you know, I went back and forth to the Middle East, writing books and making television about religion, Walking the Bible, and Abraham. And this, in many ways, subject to what we're about to get into here, I think of now as a linear life. Like I figured out what I wanted to do early. I did it for no money. I had some success. I got married. I had children. That's the fantasy, like the hockey stick, the life that we all want. But then in my 40s, I was just walloped by life. First, I got cancer at 43 as a new dad of identical twin daughters. As many of you know, I wrote a book called Council of Dads, which became a series on NBC. I had financial troubles in the last recession. My family owned a bunch of real estate in Georgia. And then my dad, who at the time had Parkinson's, got very depressed and tried to take his own life 6 times in 12 weeks. So this was a crisis in every way imaginable. And it sort of felt like life was coming at me. And for a long time, I didn't know how to tell this story, and I didn't want to tell this story. But when I did, what I found out was that everybody has a story, a time in their life when they're overwhelmed by life. Yeah. And I said to my wife, I said, there's something going on, like no one knows how to tell their story anymore. I want to figure out what I can do to help. And so what I did was just to quickly talk about what happened that led to these ideas you've just asked me about is I crisscrossed the country collecting what became hundreds of life stories of Americans of all ages, all walks of life, all 50 states. People who lost homes, lost limbs, changed careers, changed religions, got sober, got out of bad marriages. I had 1,000 hours of interviews, 6,000 pages of transcripts, and I got a team of 12 people, and we analyzed them looking for patterns that could help all of us in times of change. And if I could just summarize what I learned, the first thing that I learned is that the linear life is dead. Okay? The idea that you're going to have one job, one relationship, one spirituality, one source of happiness from adolescence to assisted living is deader than it's ever been. And everybody in this room, this is what we were taught growing up, is that there is a linear life, okay? We can think of the book Passages, which came out in '76, which says everyone does the same thing in their 20s, in their 30s, and everyone has a midlife crisis at between 39 and 44 and a half. Like that's what the reason... we are all haunted by the ghost of linearity. It just is simply not true. Just think of the pandemic. Anybody who was between 39 and 44 and a half was having a midlife crisis. But anybody who was 25 was having a crisis. Anybody who was 65, my teenagers who were 15 at the time. So the idea of the midlife crisis is a myth that we all have to get behind. So the idea of the linear life is dead. That's the number one idea. The second idea is that the non-linear life involves many more transitions. So the nonlinear life is this basic idea. My data show that we go through one disruptor every 12 to 18 months. Okay, that's 36 in our lives. And this could be as small as a fender bender or as twisting your ankle, holding you up for 2 weeks, or as big as losing a loved one or having a natural disaster. And most of these we get through relatively easily, but 1 in 10 becomes what I call a lifequake, a massive burst of change. And we go through 3 to 5 of those in our time. So the linear life is dead. The nonlinear life involves many more lifequakes, and then how you get through a lifequake is a life transition. And so the third big point is that a transition is a skill that we can and must master. It's like I'm looking at the golf course, right? What do they say golf is? Golf is a lifetime sport. Transitions are a lifetime sport that no one is teaching us how to play. And essentially what my work has been now is giving us the tools for when these things happen. And about half of them are voluntary, but half of them are involuntary. You're in a voluntary one right now. The pandemic was an involuntary one. Is giving people the tools to be able to navigate them more effectively.
Yep, excellent. Thank you so much. I loved it in the book, the difference that we all go through it.
Yep.
But our posture towards disruptors and lifequakes is very different at the end of your book. my thinking. What I really enjoyed, I think, was the idea that not waiting till you get to the other side of transition or a lifequake
Yes.
in order to reestablish life. And that you mentioned too that like you spend a very significant part of our life
Correct.
in the transition. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think that, look, so there's 3 to 5 life quakes, and here's maybe the signature piece of data. Okay, how long does it take to get through a life quake? The average length is 5 years. So you think 3, 4, 5 years in a life quake, 3 to 5 life quakes, 4, 5, 6 years in a life quake. You do the math, that's 25 years. That's half of our adult lives we are spending in transition, and yet we're not talking about them. And so, and a lot of the language now, if I could sort of poke at a little bit of the culture, the way we talk about this now is resilience, right? Well, resilience is actually a linear term. It comes from, the word resilience comes from a spring. How resilient something is the spring pulls off and it bounces back. Well, some people bounce back after a life quake, but some people bounce sideways or forwards or a different direction entirely. And so the idea, if you think about the pandemic, is such a vivid example. In the beginning, we all thought, oh, we'll stay inside for 6 weeks and then we're going to go back. Well, we now know we're not going back. We're going to someplace entirely different. Some of us may go back, but more of us are moving. I just was hearing at lunch that Naples is a booming city because people are saying, I can live anywhere now. That came out today. The census reported today that for the first time in 100 years, major cities have lost population. We have been urbanizing for 100 years, and that's changing. So our lives are nonlinear, and the thing about it is, not only are our lives nonlinear, but the transitions themselves are nonlinear, okay? And so that what happens is they come at unexpected times, not just middle age, as I was saying, but the way to think about this is that the life quake puts you on your heels, and the life transition is what puts you back on your toes. Like you're going to take some control over it and attempt to work your way through it. And that's why you can't wait. Now, some people may not want to start initially, but people tend to do one of 2 things when they get into a life quake. Either they make a 212-item to-do list and say, I'm going to get through it in a weekend, and I'm going to get a blue medal. I'm going to get, I got A's in school, and I won the track meet, and so I'm going to be the greatest at it. And then the other way people respond is they lie under the covers with a cat and don't leave the house and say, woe is me, no one's ever been through it. Well, both of those are wrong, actually, because when you look at enough of them, as I've been doing now for years, and certain patterns become clear. So transitions involve 3 phases. The first is what I call the long goodbye, where you mourn and say goodbye. One of the things I asked you last night was, did you sell your house? Well, I've just now sold my house, right? I think, is that what you said? Right, you said last week. Okay, yep. Well, you've been here for 6 months.
Right.
So you've been saying goodbye to your house for 6 months, to the life that went beyond, and you may not fully be beyond. Then there's the messy middle, which involves shedding certain habits and experimenting with new ones. And then the last one is the new beginning, where you sort of unveil your new self, okay? For 100 years, the person who came up with this formula was a guy named Arnold van Gennep, who invented the phrase rites of passage 100 years ago, a German anthropologist. He said you do these in order. First, you say goodbye, you leave one room, you walk down a hallway, you go to a new room. Totally wrong. It's just not how people do it anymore. You're a perfect example. You started your new beginning, you started your new job having not fully, in fact, you got this job, you told me, 3 weeks after interviewing. You hadn't sold your job. To my knowledge, you hadn't left your previous job. So you're a perfect example of how these things are nonlinear. And everybody's good at one of these phases and bad at one of them. So fine, maybe you're good at the new beginning. Go start your new life. But you still have to mourn the old. You still have to shut down the old life. A good example of this is if anybody here knows somebody who's been through a divorce. Okay, well, if you won't leave the old relationship behind and go to, especially if you have children, some people have affairs, which means that they're in the new room and they haven't left goodbye to the old room, right? Or maybe they said goodbye and then they start dating and then they have a new relationship, but they're parenting or grandparenting from the old life. They're always in the back room. So the thing is, all of these stories are very nonlinear. And the idea, if I can just talk about religion for a second, like, there was no linear life in the ancient world. The Bible is non-linear, right? It was, in fact, the Bible that introduces linear life, with the idea that Adam and Eve begin and you have a family with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob all the way down. That idea of a linear family was introduced by the Bible. It used to be that life was cyclical, okay? And in the Middle Ages, they think life is a staircase up to middle age and then down. It's only since the birth of the Industrial Revolution in the 1850s that we believe that life was a conveyor belt, an assembly line, and all of the ideas in the 20th century were all about linear, okay? Childhood development, the 8 stages of moral development, the 5 stages of grief. Anybody here who's lost a loved one, which is anybody in this room, the 5 stages of grief are total bunk. The idea that you do them in order, no. You don't do them in order. You do them all at the same time, and then 2 weeks later you're doing another one you thought you were behind, and then 6 months later you thought you've moved on and you're just overwhelmed. I lost my dad 6 months ago on the plane yesterday. Something I saw reminded me, and I just was awash in grief for like 3 minutes. And then I moved on. Life is nonlinear, and those of us who grew up in the very linear 20th century are haunted by that old ghost of linearity. Whereas, I'll say, the children and the grandchildren of people in this room, they know nonlinear. There's this thing I call the transition gap that the boomer parents have with their millennial and younger children, which is, wait, you're having a baby and you're not married? Or you're quitting a job and you don't know what's going to come next? Are you out of your mind? You know what my grandmother in the Depression would have said, right? Or, wait a minute, you're moving to a new city and you don't know what you're going to get. The kids do this all the time. Yeah. And their parents and grandparents don't understand it because they grew up on the web and it's all nonlinear. Like we grew up in a linear world, the industrial world, and we have to let that go and realize that the century we're in now is all about nonlinearity.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Speaking of nonlinearity, it makes me think of so many folks that go through recovery and have suffered through the effects of addiction or homelessness or trying to get themselves back on their feet. Talk a little bit about how some of knowledge you've acquired might intersect with an audience of 200 people who care deeply about issues of hunger, homelessness, and addiction.
Well, I want to say 2 things about it, actually, that I think relate to St. Matthew's, and we were discussing some of this over lunch. The first is, just as life is nonlinear, transitions are nonlinear. So anybody who's spent any time around addiction understands that relapse, and having moments of doubt and having periods of weakness when you go back to a certain way is completely normal in the process. And so while the 12-step program, and I have such admiration for it, right? We've had a century of brain science, and yet still a lot of elements of the old 12-step program that began in the 20s and 30s are still relevant. And so many of treatments back in those days are not relevant. But in the same way that you do not go through the 5 stages of grief in order and then say goodbye to the old one. And the people who've studied this, by the way, there's a guy named George Bonanno at Columbia who studies this a lot, and I'm very fond of his work. He says not only are the 5 stages of grief wrong, they're dangerous because they say to you, if you are not going through, people think if I'm not going through the steps in the order, I'm doing something wrong, and we pathologize that. We now know everybody can grieve in their own way. And anybody who is grieving, first of all, I join you, and I stretch out my arms to you. Everybody can grieve and should have the freedom and the encouragement to grieve as they want. And the same applies to getting over any trauma, whether that is addiction, whether that is homelessness, whether that's food insecurity. I just was hearing at lunch, okay, that it takes people 6 months in the process often to clear their brain fog and to build the trust where they are finally prepared to get to many of the root causes. And that the essence of that process is a narrativization process, a reclaiming control of your life story. And that's the essence of what I do. And that's what connects what I've been doing now, which is learning that when you go through a trauma, as we've all been through with the pandemic, that the essence of the recovery and that new beginning phase is to tell a new story, to add a new chapter to your story, that you went through this difficult time and you learned something from it. And that leads to the second thing I want to say that I think is relevant to this group is what It's the most powerful, enduring story of nonlinearity in the history of stories. And the answer is that it's the stories in the Bible. Okay, and if you look at it, we start with Adam and Eve, actually, right? In the Garden of Eden, kicked out of the Garden of Eden. They could have separated. They come together. They have a child. They have 2 children. One of those children murders the other. They could have split. In fact, they recover. They come together and go back. I wrote a book about this called The First Love Story. They come back together, and they have the 3rd child who becomes the progenitor in the biblical line from anybody who feels descended from that story. Abraham leaving his father's house, going to a place that God doesn't even tell him where he's going.
Wow.
Okay? Yeah. And then they go there. Israelites, they go down, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, 438 years in slavery. And then they go out into the desert. And what do when they go back into the desert? What's the first thing they say? Send us back into slavery. They got onions and leeks there. I mean, they want to go back. And why do they spend 38 years? It doesn't, trust me, it does not take 40 years to get from Cairo. I have been all over that land. It takes about, by camel, it's 3 weeks. By car, it's a few hours. By car, it's a day. And by plane, it's a few hours. Because they had to, the long goodbye. They had to say goodbye to the patterns and then become a country and become a community, become a people, become the Israelites. Then they go off into Babylon. And what happens after they, by the rivers of Babylon, they weep? They're then liberated. They don't even all go back. Some go back to Jerusalem. Some go further east to Iran, to Persia, and they live there. And some go into the diaspora. And that leads to the story that has spread these religions. But the point is, the biggest breakthroughs in the story are when they are in the wilderness, are when Abraham goes forward. That's where monotheism, are when they go across the Red Sea into Sinai. That's when they become a nation. That's when they get to law. Happens when they go into exile in Babylon. That's where they event Shabbat and all of those traditions that we now think of as built in. Abraham wasn't having challah and wine and blessings like we do in my house on Friday nights. The biggest breakthroughs occur when you are most isolated, because that's when you break away from your habits. That's when you're open to change. And so everybody in this room, while going through the pandemic, discovered something new about themselves, discovered a new habit, created a new artistic expression, worked around a problem and solved a problem. That's what you learn in transition. That's what you learn in exile. And I think that what's great about what you do, but it's also important to remember about what you do, the people that you are serving now in your mission need you to be compassionate and to understand that their recovery is not going to be any more linear than yours was, or any more linear than the Israelites were, or any more linear than anybody else's was. Is that these paths have setbacks, and we need to transform our way of thinking about them to see them for what they are, which is moments of growth and renewal.
Awesome, thank you. This is almost as good as our car ride last night from the airport back to the hotel. Bob, Letty, I think you guys are going to have some microphones. Let's open it up for the last 8 minutes here or so, and I'll take some questions from the crowd. Anybody have a question from the audience? Just raise your hand. Letty or Bob will come around. And
here's one over here in the middle there, right? There we go. I usually have to say, make sure a woman asks a question, but now we're going to have a woman go first. Please.
Yes, and I am standing. Hi, Bruce. I just have a personal question, I guess you'd say. Are you still Jewish or are you Christian?
I am a unicorn. Did I say this to you last night? I'm a Jew, married to a Jew, raising Jews. Yes, because, I mean, in fact, I've just been, was a professional honor I've never had in all these years. I was just asked to review a book in the New York Times book review about Jewish summer camps. And so I was looking at this data. Yes, my children are very involved, and they had a Banot mitzvah, as my wife and sister we call it, which is the female version of two. So they were jointly, my girls were jointly bat mitzvahed about maybe, I guess 3 years ago, on Lech Lecha, which is the portion of, which is Genesis 12, 11 and 12, but Genesis 12 at that point, where God calls Abraham to go forth. And it's the same portion that I was bar mitzvahed on, and my mother's maiden name is Abe's house of Abraham. So they had a bat mitzvah, and then my daughter, oh my God, it was so, you think national politics are complicated? They just held an election to run the youth group at my synagogue in Brooklyn Heights. And there were 3 people, and they were going to run together, and then they were declared that they couldn't, and it was very rivalrous, and somehow my daughter ended up on top. So my daughter is running the Brooklyn Heights Synagogue Youth Program, and it comes with the privilege of going to the board meetings of the synagogue. And last night she had to go to her first one, and she reported that it was deathly boring. So whoever is running, whoever runs the board meetings of St. Matthew's House or any of your nonprofits, like, don't invite the teenagers unless you're going to spice it up, because they don't want these linear board meetings.
Thank you. Who else? One here on the side, table 7, I saw a hand. Somebody else get on deck over here with Letty. There we go.
Yep, let's go. We're going to try to get as many as we can. Yep. I cannot hear you.
Let's switch to Letty, and then we'll come right back to you.
Yes, Bruce, I'm actually halfway through your book right now and was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the categories of disruptors and how some of them are relatively new over the last few decades.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I appreciate that. Yeah, so the last time someone did a study like this, there's something kind of old-fashioned about what I did, like it's sort of Studs Terkel-like of go out and collecting these stores. Why don't you bring the mic over here so she can ask her questions, and she was there. But there's something newfangled, which is the analytics, and we analyzed all of them. And so, yeah, there were a lot. I mean, I think that we were talking at lunch about how fatherhood has become a lot more common. So divorce has become a lot more common since the last study of this nature was done in the 60s. 1979 was the peak year of divorce. It's actually been going down since then. Entrepreneurship. My wife started and runs an organization called Endeavor that supports high-impact entrepreneurs in 50 countries around the world. She's very much a rock star in that space. Entrepreneurship is something that has come up enormous. So starting a business, a lot of the abuse issues, sort of women's abuse, sexual harassment, those kinds of things, we're much more comfortable talking about now. We're not studied in the past, so I think that's a change in the category. But I think the most interesting part was the next question, which actually I thought was where you're going. I'll talk a little bit about it. We talked about, I divided these lifequakes into 2 poles. One was voluntary, one was involuntary, okay? And that was pretty 50-50, right? So it was 57% voluntary and 57% involuntary, 43% voluntary. And I looked at this and I was like, wow, 43% are voluntary, like we are embracing the opportunities of the nonlinear life. But I had a bunch of millennials on my team who were helping me code, and they were like, whoa, 57% are involuntary? You mean I can't plan my life? It was fascinating. Okay, so that was the other one that I did was personal or collective. And here, 95% were personal and only 5% collective, okay? Now, so what's a personal one? A diagnosis, a job change, something of that, a divorce, a loss of a loved one. A collective would be a natural disaster. I'm here on the Gulf Coast, so a natural disaster would be one. 9/11 came up a lot, and I thought I had wasted an analytical category, right? Because it was 95/5. Because only 8% were collective and voluntary.
Wow.
Lo and behold, the pandemic comes along. And in fact, there's what I would call, as a writer, a throwaway line in my book, which says, had I done these interviews in the 20th century, when we had 2 world wars and Great Depression and women's rights and civil rights, that we would have had more collective and voluntary. The pandemic is the first time in a century that the entire planet has gone through a collective involuntary lifequake in over, in 100 years. And I think what's interesting about it is it's twofold. On the one hand, I think that we all appreciate that we can't control life as much anymore, right? And on the heels of that, 2 other things happened. We had the social justice movement in the middle of that, right? And now we have a war, that we haven't had a shooting war in Europe in 80 years, which is yet another one that the world is going through. A reminder that all problems can't be solved by the phones that we keep in our pockets. But I think that what's interesting, so the good news is we're going through one together, and I think we have empathy for other people. Everybody's family here. If we took this microphone and I went around, what's going on in your family, everybody would have 3 or 4 stories of how the pandemic has affected their family in a different way. But it's important to remember that it is affecting us in a different way. That some people are going to leave their jobs, some people are going to leave their relationships, some people are going to renew their relationship. I'm going to have a child, I'm not going to have a child, I'm going, the Great Resignation, is a perfect example of that. Just to put these numbers that we're seeing, folks, into context, there's this economic term called the quit rate. It had never in history been above 2.9%. That's 4 million people until April of last year. 4 million people for the first time in history quit a job in April of last year. Not laid off, not furloughed, not retired, not fired, quit. And that number went up every month, hitting 4.6 in December. It was just 4.3 in February. That's 50 million people have left a job in the last 12 months. That is a third of the workforce. The head of McKinsey said in the Wall Street Journal 2 weeks ago that the talent market has flipped, and 40% of white-collar workers want to quit. That's 65 million people. That is directly related to the pandemic, because what these lifequakes are is that they're pauses that disrupt the normal, that invite us and maybe even oblige us to rethink and reimagine our lives, and that's what we're all doing. Let's see if we can quickly get a question and go over just a second.
Yes, my question is, how did you find all these people as you were crossing the country? How did you advertise for them? Did you get them through universities? How did they come to you?
The answer is I started with people that I knew. I then, at the end of every interview, said, who else do you know who's had an interesting life story? And it sort of metastasized. So I put it in social media. You can follow me on any of the platforms, Bruce Feiler at various social media platforms. And I sort of put it out there, and now the book has been out there, and so people are coming to me, and so I can say I've actually just spent the last year collecting another chunk of stories. I will have now gotten 400 in 4 years for a new book I'm writing about work, which is about how we can all find meaning and purpose in our nonlinear work lives. I've just turned in the first half of it. I'll be working on it on the plane going home later this afternoon, and it'll be out this time next year. And it's about, one of the titles that's floating around as a possible title is called How Not to Have a Career, because it's about how we have much more freedom in our work lives to do what we work. In the old days of getting on the corporate ladder and only going up is not only true anymore. And I think that, as we wrap up here, I will say what I have learned from all the people that I've talked to is that the essence of it, as I said, is a storytelling act. We all have, if everyone is just quiet for 20 seconds and listens to the story that's going on in your head, it's the story of who you are and where you came from and where you're going, what's important to you. If you got a call right now and you had to rush to a hospital to see a loved one, there's that story that would go on in your head about that person and how you met them and what they mean to you. That story is the story of your life. And what we've learned, we were talking about brain research at lunch, what we've learned from a generation of research is that story isn't just part of you, that story is you in a fundamental way. Like life is the story that you tell yourself. And so what happens when we go through these moments is that story gets paused. It's a rupture, like it's a plot twist in the Hollywood terminology. And the Italians have a wonderful phrase that I think captures this best of all. And that phrase is lupus in fabula. Fabula is our life when it's fabulous. It's the fairy tale. The lupus is the wolf that shows up. And the Italian phrase is the wolf and the fairy tale. And what that means, and they use it for like speak of the devil. Just when everything is going along swimmingly, along comes a wolf. That wolf could be a downsizing. It could be, it could be a tornado, right? It could be a diagnosis. It could be a pandemic. And what happens is that we want to make these go away. Like we want to banish the wolf. But the wolf is what makes it a fairy tale. You've got to get through the woods. You've got to get around the wolf. You've got to somehow manage to overcome the hardship that you face. And that's why it's a fairy tale. Because if you banish the wolf, you banish the hero. And if there's one thing I learned, it's that we all have to be the heroes of our story. And so as we wrap up, I want to, again, commend and celebrate you for what you're doing, particularly the visionary people who run and all the volunteers who uphold St. Matthew's House. Because you were saying, there's not a wolf in my life right now, but there's other people with wolves and I want to help them. Because you're going to have a wolf sooner or later in your life too. And it's almost, I'm prepared to say, what you learn by helping them is also going to help you and your loved ones overcome your wolf. You can be the hero of your own story. And it's that power that we have to tell our own story that's the great gift of being alive today, and it's the gift that we should all take advantage of.
Worth the wait or what? Wow. Bruce, thank you so much. I know you're going to stick around, and we'll have a table available for some. If you don't have a copy of one of his books, you'll be able to purchase one here on the side table and get it signed, maybe take a picture or whatever if you like at the tail end for a little while. But thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think you've deposited some real wisdom to us and some challenge for us as well. Thank you.
My pleasure. Keep up the good work, everyone.
Gentlemen, thank you. Wasn't that great? Weren't they fantastic? Really interesting, wasn't it? Well, it is pretty apropos that we're talking about mastering life's transitions today, because not only do they happen to people, but they also happen to organizations too. And St. Matthew's House went through its own transition from a leadership standpoint in the last year. Fortunately, that transition went very smoothly, with the naming of Steve Bruder as our new CEO back in November. Before becoming CEO, Steve spent over 7 years as the Chief Operating Officer at St. Matthew's House, and then over 6 months as the interim CEO. So because of that continuity, along with Steve's immense knowledge of the organization and his incredible accomplishments at St. Matthew's House, our board of directors named Steve the CEO after a comprehensive global search. Steve is an accomplished, dynamic leader and a strategic thinker with a proven track record of guiding successful results. He's an amazing visionary for the future of St. Matthew's House, and God has prepared him for his entire life for this role he has now. So on that note, please give a warm welcome to our CEO, Mr. Steve Bruder.
Thank you very much, Bob. Welcome, everyone. This is so great to see you all here. And wow, Bruce, we have to have you come back and talk about your next book. I would so much look forward to that. Well, Bob gave you a little background, and I've been asked, what led me to St. Matthew's House? Why did I follow a career in business to join a nonprofit in a ministry? And first, I think God had a plan for that. It was a choice that came to me. In the book of Esther, you probably know it well, Mordecai says to Esther, "And who knows but that you have come to your position for such a time as this." So I believe that God placed me in this position at such a time as this. But I'm also here because I believe there is a cause in what we do. This is my why. When people ask me, what's the why, start with the why. It's the cause that we all believe in. And I'm driven by the cause to help poor and broken people and to help them restore their lives. And that's what Jesus wants us to do. Of course, he said, love one another. And in that verse in John 13:34, it goes on to say, as I have loved you. So I think that's really why we're all here today. You believe in our cause. And just as our board of directors and our leadership team believe in our cause, and all of our volunteers and donors and partners as well. This is my passion, to push us to achieve more. We can do more together. This also means that we'll encounter challenges along the way. I always think of them as opportunities, and transitions along the way, just as Bruce writes in his book. He writes about the non-linear life. We heard about that. And of course, I immediately think of COVID. That was the disruptor. That's what changed that linear course for many of us. And I think about our organization that emerged from COVID with much stronger policies and protocols and practices. Another change is we met the huge demand for hunger, the food insecurity that we saw come out of COVID, and the negative impact on businesses and workers due to the pandemic. And that led to our food assistance program. We've garnered an unprecedented amount of earned media through this process, thanks to our great marketing and communications team, and as we reported on our food assistance program. And just recently, we've been recognized by the Florida State Senate for the Pride in Florida Award, and just last week by the Collier Community Foundation for our work during COVID with the Harvey Kapnick Award. Today, we're a much stronger organization financially and organizationally. Our social enterprises are doing very well. We held our most successful event in February, the Naples Automotive Experience. We have better relationships today with our key partner agencies, and we even have better relationships with city and county government. Our programs are in the best shape ever, with better retention and an improved culture. We now have a clearly defined continuum of care in our programs, but it also runs through our mission. We move people from crisis to care to be contributors. But I have to go back. It's always good to have that point of reference back to 1987, to where we started and how we got on this path as a continuum of care. You see a picture of a man eating from a dumpster, and that was the picture that appeared in the Naples Daily News just days after a group came together in a Bible study to talk about what more they could do. And what they came up with was feeding the hungry and the homeless, and that led to the first Thanksgiving meal of St. Matthew's House. Well, we've come a long way, but our emphasis, our focus is that St. Matthew's House delivers innovative, free market solutions to lift people from poverty and their broken state. When I think about crisis, of course, we all can identify with the hunger crisis. And this picture is our main campus on Airport Road, where we had cars ringed around the building for a food distribution in April of 2020. The numbers are striking. We went from serving about 400 households a month to 4,000 a month in April, just 1 month change, and then up to 20,000. And that number has been pretty consistent, and we see it rising. So that's a hunger crisis identified very visibly. And then we have a homelessness crisis. Today, our wait list at our shelter has over 100 people on the list. And the breakdown of that is pretty striking and disturbing when we have over 20 moms on the list with children that are waiting to get into the shelter. But also we have 1 in 4 of our guests are experiencing homelessness for the first time. This is due to that disruptor, that earthquake, that lifequake from COVID, and now inflation that is causing people to face homelessness. And another breakdown is that 29% of the people currently in our shelter are over the age of 55. So another changing demographics. We have an addiction crisis. This is the face of addiction. In our graduations, we always have a then and now photograph of the people that go through our program. This is an example. So this is the face of addiction. And one of the terrible statistics that we're now accustomed to is that we have over 100,000 deaths a year due to drug overdose. So definitely a crisis. And we have a poverty crisis. Today, it's reported by CNBC that about 64% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And they're just one lifequake, one disruption, one tipping point from losing what they have and potentially becoming homeless. So then we move from identifying these crisis situations to our care, what we provide. Well, we talked about the food distribution, and you saw a number in the video earlier. I can update that. We've now distributed over 350,000 meal boxes to people, and we expect that this month it will be another 20,000 to add to that total. Just a striking number. We couldn't do it without all of our volunteers, our church partners, through those 12 distribution sites. In our shelters, we have 150 beds in the Naples shelter. Thankfully, we were able to add beds to respond to that wait list when the Board of County Commissioners in Collier County approved our request. And we have 44 beds in our Immokalee shelter. Those are the only 2 emergency shelters in Collier County. And care in our addiction. This is a great photo. It's wonderful to see very happy faces, healthy looking people. These are men and women that have completed our 12-month recovery program, and we celebrate them at every graduation. 688 graduates to date. Another part of our care is in job training, building skills for people, work readiness programs, interview skills, and we have social enterprises that employ today about 40% of our graduates throughout the organization. We're very proud of that. This is a photo in our Lulu's kitchen where trainees earn culinary skills and are able to get great jobs. There's such a demand today for hospitality and food service. Then we think about connection and having people be contributors. So this is just, I love this photo of people coming together, being connected. This was taken in our Naples shelter, and it just shows what it means to be connected with others, to understand that you aren't alone in this. And then housing. This helps people become contributors. We have several transitional housing projects. This is our Wolf Apartments, where we have 44 beds. And when we think about housing, we don't ascribe to the Housing First model. The federal government is promoting that model and has been for years. We think of stabilization first. It's so important to understand the behaviors that led to someone being homeless or addicted. And then seeing families reunited. This is such an important part of our program, and these are people that now become contributors once again. Moms get their kids back, dads get their families back, mothers and daughters, fathers and mothers get their sons and daughters back. And it's just wonderful to see that connection. Our social enterprise employ people in various categories. This happens to be our thrift fleet, but we have opportunities in hospitality and maintenance and agriculture, and there's many opportunities for our people to gain job skills in our own operations. And then just to wrap up with the continuum of care, I love this photo. When I think about children that are in our programs, their parents are in our programs, children that are in our shelter. But our program really helps lead people from a broken state through this transformative process that reduces the effect of poverty, that hunger, homelessness, and addiction. So just a few more updates. Today, our annual budget is approaching $40 million a year. We have over 288 employees. We're spread out over 18 locations in 4 counties in Southwest Florida. So that leads me to state very proudly that we believe as a team that St. Matthew's House is a major nonprofit force delivering a wide spectrum of social services at no cost to the taxpayer. A very important point. One way to illuminate this is the Collier County Jail tells us that it takes about $150 a day to house someone in the jail. In our shelters, we estimate that's about $40 a day. The difference, it's a contrast, but the difference is the $150 is paid by the taxpayer and the $40 is not. Looking forward, as we plan more growth and expansion, we know there will be challenges. Again, I think of them as opportunities, and I think we're well positioned to present solutions in this very changing and complex world. You heard Bruce talk about it. It's in his book. It's what we've lived. Our new, some really important developments. Our new alumni and family program will help connect more people and limit recurrences. Our new training and development center that we're working on will help equip people through workforce development programs. We're opening a Fort Myers satellite office to help the folks on our team that live in Lee County have a shorter commute and also help us establish a greater presence in Lee County. We're planning a chapel in Alva at Joe's Place, another exciting project. This facility will be for worship and meetings and classes and community meals. Now we're proud to announce that we'll be opening our 7th thrift store in Golden Gate City in about 60 days. We've received approval, as I mentioned, from Collier County to add those 46 beds to bring it up to 150 to work down that wait list. And we'll begin construction on 3 more homes at Justin's Village, a campus for recovery graduates. We're moving into our new food and emergency assistance warehouse. This is a 10,000 square foot warehouse that will be principally the home of our food assistance program, but it will also be an opportunity for the county and other agencies to stage in the event of a disaster or crisis. We're working with developers on affordable housing options. We'll focus more on the aging population. Right now, it's projected that seniors will make up about 50% of the Collier County population by the year 2050. And today, more than half of the veterans living in our county are over 75. So aging populations will require more assistance and support as they cope with isolation, depression, the lack of affordable housing, healthcare issues, and other issues that are presented to them. And we'll work with our partners to address better access for mental health issues, housing. And even Monday, I can report that we're meeting with different communities, different counties to be able to help them set up their own programs and social enterprises modeled after St. Matthew's House so we can have greater impact in our community. So there's a lot more work to do. The COVID pandemic and now this highest rate of inflation that we've experienced in 40 years has taken a tremendous toll on the people and the infrastructure in Southwest Florida. But I can report that the St. Matthew's House Board of Directors, our staff, our thousands of volunteers will keep on tackling these tough societal issues to help make our community a better place for everyone. So I thank you for being here today. I thank Bruce for joining us today, and I'll turn it back. Well, before I do that, almost forgot, Bob. I'm very happy to introduce a video from one of our board members, Mike Duke. He has a video message to share with you.
Thank you for supporting the Cornerstone event today. I'm Mike Duke. When I retired as CEO of Walmart in 2014, my wife Susan and I decided to make Naples, Florida our home. We came, got settled in, and of course we quickly found a church home. And it was not long after that that we heard about St. Matthew's House. We loved what we first heard there at our church, so we called and decided to come for a tour. We were so impressed on the tour that we decided to sign up for volunteering. So she and I then loved the idea of volunteering together so we could do it that way at St. Matthew's House. And that's where we really had the great experiences, I think the best of all. We loved the mission of St. Matthew's House. We love that it's a Christian faith-based organization, but we especially loved just seeing the staff and how they love and care for people. They love and care for the people that are going through difficult times, but they also make sure that they not only take care of the physical needs, but also the spiritual needs of people. Then a couple of years ago, I was invited to join the board of directors of St. Matthew's House. What a wonderful blessing that has been. I've served on a number of corporate boards and not-for-profit boards, but I don't think any have I felt the blessings that I've felt. So I do hope that you learn more and even get more engaged with St. Matthew's House. Thank you again.
Well, thank you to Mike. He was scheduled to be here in person at our January event. Couldn't make it today, so he was willing to send that message on our behalf. So we hope that today that you go away feeling cared about and appreciated because of your generosity from the past. I also thank Steve. I think all of us, when you looked at that list of all the projects that are in motion, the future is really bright. And we're in good hands. Our board is strong. Our CEO is strong. We've got a bright future ahead of us. Today we want to give you one opportunity as you leave to join us in that future. You've been a big part of the past, and you're a big part of the present. And we would be remiss if we didn't give you a chance. At your table, there are some giving cards available for you. Recently, last week, most of you received a letter in the mail from Steve of our Easter appeal, a way that we can continue serving people who are experiencing homelessness, hunger, and addiction. You also might have received an email. Anything you give today goes directly to that appeal, allowing us to expand our shelter beds, allowing us to tackle several of these projects that Steve has mentioned to you. So this isn't a hard ask. We're not going to lock the doors and chain you in until you give. But we thought we haven't been together in a long time. So we need to make sure and give you an opportunity, if you're so inclined, to join us in giving yet today. There's 3 houses at the back, symbolic of St. Matthew's House. If you'd like to give a gift today, you can do so in the house there. You can also put your phone up. This is a cool thing. You can put your phone up and scan, turn on the camera, and hit that QR code like you're in a restaurant on the menu that you've been learning these last couple of years. And you can give electronically right there as well. So we're super happy that you're here. We don't want to pressure you into it, but we do hope you're inspired about the future at St. Matthew's House and that you feel appreciated and cared about for the generosity you've already demonstrated here today. We hope you have a wonderful day. Bob, I think you're going to dismiss us.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we hope you had a great time today, but that is it for our program. We want to thank you again for your continued support of St. Matthew's House. Bruce is going to be sticking around for a little bit to sign copies of his book for you and take some pictures as well. And for any of the golfers here in the room, we want to remind you that the Dean Lind Memorial Golf Classic is taking place right here at Tiburon on that beautiful golf course. That is next month on April 11th, so we encourage you to sign yourself up for that, or your foursome if you'd like. You can pick up a brochure on your way out the door, or else you can also sign up for the event as well on our website, stmatthewshouse.org, and then click on the events tab. So once again, thank you again for joining us. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and God bless you.